Hey folks, it's me, Stack Up Sketch. I am sitting down here with Jason Pace of Digital Future Labs. First, Jason, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for asking. We're going to be talking about a game called Ghostlight Manor. For everybody else out there who may not know, what is Ghostlight Manor?
Ghostlight is a completely new kind of puzzle strategy mechanic that we developed in the Digital Future Lab over the last couple years that is fundamentally based on logical relationships between monsters with different kinds of behaviors. It kind of harkens back to old school arcade games in some ways. It borrows from casual games in other ways, and a lot of strategy and tactics.
So it's kind of a blending of a couple of things. But before we go into the game itself, and we'll get to that and we'll talk more in detail, I want to talk a little bit about Digital Future Labs. What is that?
Yeah, the Digital Future Lab is University of Washington Bothel's commercial game development studio. And what makes this unique from the university's perspective is that there are very few commercial studios, game development studios, that are attached to universities. We're actually one of only a handful. I believe there are less than 5 in the country. And what's really cool about this is that it allows us, because we're commercial, it allows us to tackle more ambitious long-term projects than you might otherwise be able to do in a university setting. So instead of being attached to a particular student group or student project, we bring multiple student cohorts over time to work on these much longer term projects.
How long does how long has Ghostlight Manor been worked on?
Ghostlight's been in development in either the research prototype phase or the commercial phase for over 2.5 years now.
So that's a couple of classes of students working through the game, right?
Yep, we have the lab is very fortunate because we work on games. There's a lot of student passion associated with it, and we've been really lucky to have students who have contributed to the game for much of their undergraduate careers. So some of the interns I have working in the lab have been on the project since the beginning. But we do rotate through groups of students as they come in, and they spend typically at least a year, and again typically also more than a year on these projects. And then they may graduate and will continue working and improving the title and the IP.
So how does the process start? Jason, you're the creative director? Or are you the project overseer? Did you have the original idea? Like where did the idea for Ghostlight Manor start? Take me through. We're 2.5 years ago. We're going to do this. How does that start?
Yeah, so the way the studio started, really, the way we developed our desire to work on games was through a partnership with one of our computer science professors who had a National Science Foundation grant to teach introductory programming, computer programming, using games. And he had been working on this grant for a couple years with only developer students. And so he had no game designers, no artists, and the games that they were making weren't really that fun because they only had the programmers that were doing all of the work. So he came to me and said, hey, could we begin pulling in more creative students and different kinds of students to round these games out? And I said, sure. And that was kind of the start of this. This was about 3 years ago. At that time, I stood up in front of the whiteboard as we were throwing out game ideas, and I sketched out the core mechanic for Ghostlight in about an hour, which is this system of revealing and scaring away monsters that have different behaviors. So we spent a few months just getting students kind of into the flow of this very simple prototype we made. And then about 6 months into development, we realized we had something really cool and interesting. And at that time, we kind of forked things off. And so the research piece went in one direction and the commercial piece began going in a very different direction. That was 2.5 years ago, and that was the start of Ghostlight. Because we work with undergraduate students, most of whom have no clue what they're doing from a domain expertise perspective, like we don't have seasoned artists or seasoned developers or animators, I take a really hands-on approach at the beginning of these projects. I frame things out, scope them out in partnership with my lead producer, who's the assistant director of the lab. The two of us really provide a lot of structure. And then over time, as students begin working and become more fluent in the overall process of game dev, I try and hand off more responsibility to them. But the key here is, because we're working with a student population, but we have a really high quality bar, we want to have a very strong vision and really strong boundaries so that the students don't just kind of flail around and churn.
Now, one of the things that was really interesting to me there, you had mentioned a part where you looked at bringing in other people, maybe not necessarily the coder or a graphic designer or whatever the case may be, but looking to all these disciplines and pulling them together. Because that's really what game development is like, I'd imagine. You have people from all these disciplines coming together to make a product. Is that sort of what you're emulating?
Yeah, the lab, what's one of the things I find really fascinating about the lab is that University of Washington Bothell does not have a game design major per se. So the lab is pulling students from all over campus, lots of different majors into this game development process. So we have people who are majoring in psychology or fine art, or in some cases electrical engineering or biology. They're coming into the lab with a shared passion for games, but they're not necessarily coming from just a gamer perspective. My background, I worked in games for about a decade, including a little over 5 years working on Halo. And one of the things that was really frustrating to a lot of us, I think, in the industry, is that we wanted to take risks. We wanted to try new kinds of games and sort of explore and do different kinds of stuff. But because there's so much at stake in these high budget games, you have very little and limited opportunity to take a risk. Well, at the university, I can bring in all of these different kinds of students with wildly different perspectives, some of whom would never consider themselves to be like hardcore gamers. And we can actually take some of these risks and explore new situations and new kinds of game mechanics. And so really having a well-rounded team with wildly diverse students, which is kind of the mission of the lab, is what's enabling us, I think, to do this kind of work.
So now that you have your team, you have this plan, and as you said, this wildly diverse group of students ready to work on a project, how do you get the project?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, so I take a really hands-on approach at the beginning,
Right.
especially as far as sketching out the mechanic goes. But that also means that we keep the initial vision pretty simple. So when you look at the kinds of games that we're producing, and Ghostlight definitely falls into this category, you'll find that the core mechanic is really fairly simple at its heart. I mean, most game mechanics are pretty simple at their heart, and then you just layer complexity on top of it. We start with game types that we call evergreen, which are games like Super Breakout or the kind of Zuma Luxor Match 3 games, Tetris style games that are well understood at this point. We've been making them for a long time. The core mechanic is pretty easy to mess around with and have fun without requiring a lot of very high level design expertise. And then over time, as the students start getting more confident at building out these really simple but fun kinds of experiences, we also start layering complexity. And that's where the diversity comes in. And I think it's really fascinating because we have all these different kinds of students who identify as all different kinds of gamers, non-gamers, somewhere in the middle. Their ideas are very different than if we're sitting in a room full of, let's say, guys who have been making the same kinds of games together for 20 years. You get these really weird questions, and people question assumptions all the time, and like, why would you ever want to do that? And sometimes we say, oh, why would we ever want to do that? And so the games start evolving in, I think, really unique ways, and you can take even these super simple mechanics like Super Breakout mechanics and start adding really cool twists and turns. And that's what we do in the lab. We start really simple and we build up incrementally from there.
Fantastic. So what was the base premise of Ghostlight Manor then, to go back to that individual project? What did you start off with?
It's kind of funny because the project started out as a research tool to teach introductory programming. The design prompt was very different than you might see in other game industry. The design prompt was actually, I need to teach students two-dimensional arrays, which is sort of like, your code is going through a linear list of stuff. And so we're standing up at the whiteboard and I'm like, okay, what kind of game could I do to that would have things like in a logical grid? And so we came up with this kind of Space Invaders metaphor where everything was arranged very logically in this like very geometric grid on the screen. And then we just started riffing and saying, okay, what could we do here that would bring some more strategy quickly into just what is usually just kind of a click fest, right? And so we started giving each of those little items in that grid specific behaviors that would interact with others. And that eventually, as we started, we had no characters, no story at this point. And as we started just messing around with this mechanic, somebody, I can't remember who it was, said, "Oh, wouldn't this be cool if it was kind of a monster theme?" And that's how the initial fiction and story of Ghostlight came into being.
Fantastic. So how do you iterate on the different versions? Like, all right, so you have your base prototype, you're going on. Is that driven by the students? Is it driven by you? Is it driven by a bit of both?
It's really a little bit of both. So my goal is I have a couple goals actually. One is to put the highest quality games out into the market that we can possibly produce. The equal goal, and in some cases an even more important goal, is to give the students the best possible professional development experience that we can provide to them. And so understanding the limitations that we're working with, which is sort of a variable worker population that comes and goes, students who come in not knowing a lot of stuff. The more I can provide structure for them throughout this process, filling in any gaps that arise, the better off we are. So as Ghostlight evolves, there are, much like with any game, right? So you make a game, and as you're going along making the game, you get all kinds of great ideas about stuff you want to do. Oh, we can do this, we can do that. And you put them in what we call a backlog in computer development, and or software development. And that typically means that, maybe one day you'll revisit it, but more than likely than not, it's going in a black hole of unfulfilled dreams and wishes. Well, because of our continuously iterative cycle over long periods of time, we are always able to reach back into that backlog as new groups of students come in and see what stuff we're most excited about. And that's one of the most fascinating parts of this kind of model for a game studio, is that it's not just doing the same kinds of things that industry is doing, but it's doing different and in some ways more innovative kinds of things. Because we're not super dependent on revenue, we can take more risks. We have a longer time horizon. And so typically what happens is, we'll get together on a big release with a group of students. Hopefully we'll be able to get it out the door with the same group so they can see what they've done, although that doesn't always work out. But then when the next group comes in, we've got a great idea of stuff we would like to tackle next from that backlog. And we usually just kind of go through, prioritize, and say, we're going to grab these 3 features and start working on them. So it's a really nice continuous flow. We don't need to reinvent the wheel with each new group of students who come in. It does end up giving us an opportunity to I would say probably once a year, we just really set a higher bar than the year before. And that's where we're at now. We're at the 3rd iteration of Ghostlight, and we're really starting to hit this place where we feel pretty good about the overall quality relative to something like PopCap's Peggle 2 or Plants vs. Zombies, which are really kind of the bar we're trying to hit.
Sure. Now, let me ask a little bit about what the students get out of this. Now, I know, obviously, those who worked on it at the beginning are no longer on the project, but I imagine they managed to keep tabs on it and things like that. But what really are they getting out of the experience other than making a portion of a game?
What I really hope the students are getting out of the lab is the kind of professional identity development that you would normally get at a top-tier external internship. There is a big and ongoing disconnect, of course, between industry and the university, right? So the university says industry is so focused on the bottom line that nobody has the time and opportunity to explore new ideas. It's all about revenue. And then industry says the university never finishes anything. They're just always kind of churning in this research. They don't actually think about what they're going to do with it. And the lab exists to bridge that divide. And the students come into the lab, which has a really high industry bar. We move really fast. We go to conferences. We have giant bug databases. We're all scrambling in crunch trying to get ready for releases. So in that regard, it's very much an industry environment and requires everybody to kind of step up to the plate and put their best selves forward and really work to develop their talents and skills. And then on the other hand, though, we are still at the university and we're not primarily driven by maximizing revenue. So we have the opportunity to kind of dream big and take risks. And what I really hope that these students are taking away from this is an ability to go into their careers with both of those pieces intact. So they start their first career roles and they're like, oh, yeah, I know exactly how this business works. I've been through it. It's not like a complete culture shock, but also I know how to bring sort of this desire to do something more, to really dream big, to take risks with me in a smart way that's going to make sense. And if we can provide that to students, that kind of magical hybrid of all of the practical focus of industry and all of the exploratory passion of the university, then these students are going to be really set up for success.
So talk a little bit more about Ghostlight Manor. What are some of the key features in this? I mean, really get into, give me the large overview.
Cool. So Ghostlight is as I mentioned, it's a completely new kind of mechanic. We've been testing, we've got about 1,000 hours now of play testing and rebalancing in on this. So, pardon me. The core focus of the game is based around doing certain things to an army of monster characters, working with them in different ways, scaring them away, using them to accomplish different tasks. And each one of those monsters has a specific game-changing behavior that relates to all of the other monsters on the screen. So in a typical level, you will see a whole bunch of unrevealed figures kind of file in, and your job is to first reveal them and reveal them in hopefully an order that's going to be beneficial, because whenever you reveal them, they start doing things. For example, we have a Dracula character. When you reveal it, it jumps to a random place on the screen, bites something, and turns it into a ghost. A ghost is kind of the core tool of the game. They do things like explode, and they transform into different kinds of ghost forms, and objectives will frequently involve doing specific things with ghosts. So you can, for example, reveal a vampire or Dracula if you need to create a bunch of ghosts, and be confident that that character will create a whole bunch of ghosts for you. Now, by the same token, ghosts will explode if you don't deal with them quickly enough, and whenever a ghost explodes, it drains one of your health bars, which we call batteries in the game. So it's all about balancing the reveal and the scaring away. There are a bunch of different monster types that you encounter over time. Each of the monster types interacts with each other and has unique behavior. For example, there is a zombie character that when it's revealed, it infects everything around it and makes it invincible for a certain number of turns. So you can see one of the things that's really cool about this game is that the more characters you add into this mix with unique behaviors, the higher the strategic complexity becomes, because you reveal one character and it freezes everything on the board, and then another character may hide everything and they'll still be frozen, so you really can't do anything. So one of the cool things about this is we found that the more just elements we introduce, the matrix of strategy kind of goes up geometrically. And that's been, I think, the most fun has been working to create the monster behaviors and then create new custom-tuned levels that are as devious and diabolically clever as we can.
Fantastic. And now, so you're currently, the game's like, I don't want to say done because that's kind of the wrong term, but there's 56 levels designed, and you're currently waiting on Greenlight. And as soon as you get your Greenlight votes, you're pulling the trigger and launching with those levels, right?
Yep, we are good to go. So
that's why I hesitate to use the word like done, because we're still sort of waiting for that green light thing, but the game is finished, right?
The game is never done in the full sense of the word, but the initial campaign is locked and in the can and ready to go live as soon as we're greenlit, and that is 56 levels. They're increasingly difficult as you go through the game, and we think we've got a really great, balanced and tuned 56 level single player campaign. We also are right now in active development on multiplayer and our first expansion. Like I said, the game becomes really cool. The way the model's constructed is we have this great 56 level campaign with all of these different monster characters and a bunch of different light beams that do different things that you can use. And we can throw one more character with one new behavior type in there and completely open up the design possibilities and just start cranking out cool new levels. And that's what we're doing. So we have in development right now, 3 new monster characters and a couple of new light beams for Lightbot, which is the character you control. And our goal there is to add 20 new levels, and that are in different areas with different game mechanics around them, and also begin giving you the ability to customize Lightbot's loadout. So right now, Lightbot has a standard set of light beams, and we're doubling that so users can and players can kind of mess around with different combinations, like, oh, in this level I'll pick this one, and this one, and see what happens. So that's really exciting. We're psyched about that. But I think the most exciting piece that's coming in our next release is multiplayer. We're doing 2 to 4 player multiplayer tournaments and matches, and it's all real time. It's very fast moving. There's a lot of smack talking that happens in these tournaments, and it takes what's a really great single player campaign and just blows it out of the water and makes it super exciting.
Now, you had mentioned a little bit while we were kind of prepping for this about how the multiplayer came about. Talk to us a little bit about that, because that was a student idea, right?
Yep. So, and this is another case where I provide a lot of structure up front, but I also, the entire process of the lab kind of is what we call take down the creative director. And that is, I come on really strong with the structure up front, but I say, you know what, as soon as y'all think that you are ready to go head to head or toe to toe with me, start pushing back, because I am not always right, as much as I might tell you that I am. And so what we see is, over time, students gain confidence, and I'll come into the room and I'll be like, these are the 5 things that need to happen. And a student will actually say, yeah, no, not so much. You're wrong about this 4th one. And that is what we love to see in the lab. Multiplayer was kind of the same thing. In the beginning of this process, I said, you know what? Multiplayer is a boondoggle of complexity. We're just going to avoid it because it's too hard for us to tackle. And everybody was like, oh, okay, we'll just do single player. Well, in comes one of our devs, and who's kind of a rock star, and spends about 2 quarters kind of, diligently working on the single player campaign, and then has a capstone project coming up. Capstone projects are like big sort of senior year projects that allow you to tackle meaty stuff for your degree in computer science. And the student's like, you know what, you're completely wrong about multiplayer. I can see a pathway to do this in a way that's really smart and going to be really, really fun, and I want to do it for my capstone. And we were like, all right, great, go for it. And so he kind of went heads down, put together a prototype for this multiplayer experience in a couple weeks, debuted it to the studio in one of our big Friday sync meetings, and everybody just kind of like spontaneously stood up and cheered because it was that awesome. So multiplayer was completely the vision of one single student who kind of got in, evangelized it, convinced us that he could make it happen, and it happened a couple weeks later.
That to me is just freaking that's amazing. To me, that speaks volumes of the program, to be able to go in there and kind of pivot and adjust and be able to really make this cool thing, and then make this cool thing even better. And the students are getting not only some real world experience there, but also to be able to flex and be creative, which is just amazing. And speaking of the Greenlight and the multiplayer and all this stuff, like I said, you are on Greenlight. People can find you on Steam. You need some votes, right?
Yeah, we need votes. I was really excited about the progress of Ghostlight. We are an offbeat kind of strange puzzle, new kind of game. And frequently when games that don't fit the model of Steam go up, they kind of languish. We had done a ton of work. We had interns at PAX and Seattle Indies Expo, and at Microsoft's campus, kind of really going out and building community. And we were amazed when we put the game up on Greenlight that we hit the top 100 in less than 2 weeks. And so we're just really trying to keep that momentum up now. The way Greenlight works typically is Steam will swoop in the Valve folks like once a month or so, and they will grab the games that seem to be getting the most interest from the community, and they'll approve them, and they'll go into the retail channel. Getting into the top 100 is the first major hurdle to getting the attention of the Greenlight team at Valve. We did that, and now our goal before they come in and with the next batch is to just get as high up that top 100 as we can to get their attention.
Fantastic. So obviously, folks, if you're listening to this, go check them out on Greenlight. Give them your vote. The game looks amazing. You've actually given me a key. I'm going to be getting a chance to play it, and I'll give out my full review here later next week after you folks have heard this interview. I also want to stop for a moment and thank you, Jason, for the support. Not only you, but the students there have shown for Stack Up.
Yeah, thank you. And so I've got to say that when I first started talking to you guys about the potential of maybe partnering and getting the game out to our troops, I mentioned this just in passing to the students, and every head in the studio kind of perked up, and immediately the answer was like, "Yep, what can we do? Let's do it. This is really cool." And I've seen that exact same response from everybody in the university community, all the way up through our senior administration. Like, "Yep, let us do what we can to get this game out to our troops and see if we can, make the holidays a little cheerier." One of the things we see, of course, at the university is that we are really far away from a lot of the stuff that's going on, and I think it's easy to feel disconnected from like what's happening all over the world. And I see this as a really great way of us tangibly and materially showing our support for what our troops are doing around the world. So anything we can do, we are super excited to partner with you guys and hopefully just get this out to everybody who might be interested.
Awesome. That's just amazing. And like I said, even more reason to go over there and get that game greenlit is the fact that there's a multiplayer update right around the corner, right?
Yep. So
not only are you getting a done game once it's greenlit, there's more coming.
Yeah, the cool thing I think about what we're doing at the university lab is that we are not designed to maximize revenue. And so all of this ongoing work, we're planning to roll into free upgrades to anybody who has the game over time. So for the indefinite future, as we keep bringing new groups in and raising the bar and adding all this new stuff, our plan of record right now is just to roll this into free incremental upgrades for anybody who's got the game. Multiplayer is already spec'd out along with the enhancements that I was talking about, and that is scheduled to roll out early Q1 of 2017. So it is in progress and looking good.
Fantastic. That's just amazing. I really think the whole thing you have going on over there is awesome. Folks, when you're listening, definitely check them out. I'll have all the links on the page below or if you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be down below the video here. So make sure to check all that out. Jason, I want to thank you for coming on personally, taking time out of your day to talk not only about Ghostlight Manor, but also about digital labs and everything that you're doing over there. It's just amazing, man.
Brian, thank you very much. Really excited to be working with you guys. I speak for everybody in the studio and everybody on campus that we wish the troops the best, and we are just really, really psyched about this partnership.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Jason. And folks, thanks for listening.